Good evening, Tanse, and welcome to APTN National News. I'm Daryl Stranger. The Saskatoon Police Service has confirmed that human remains found on the banks of the Saskatchewan River near the village of St. Louis, Saskatchewan on September 29th are those of Megan Gallagher. Gallagher was a 30-year-old Métis woman from Saskatoon. She went missing in September of 2020. In December of 2021, police called her death a homicide. 9 people are charged in connection with her death. 3 are in custody, charged with first-degree murder, and police are still looking for Summer Sky Henry, who is also charged with murder. 6 others face various charges in connection with Gallagher's death. All charges were laid before her remains were found. After a provincial investigation and after their loved one died while in care at the Cape Breton Regional Hospital, a Mi'kmaq family continues to demand answers. Inja Moore brings us up to date.
Beep, 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 and I even said, help, help, you know.
That's Judy Sark of the Eskizoni First Nation, describing the night she called for help from her hospital bed at the Cape Breton Regional Hospital. Her friend and fellow patient, Bridget Ann Denny, had fallen on the floor and could not get up. Sark still remembers that night.
I kept on pressing that beep, beep, beep sound, and then when I pressed it, nobody came and helped her. And I kept on saying, help! Somebody fell down. You know, I had to because she was my friend.
Denny, 65 years old, was a residential school survivor, spoke the Mi'kmaq language, was a mother of 5 and 15 grandchildren, and an active community member of the Eskizoni First Nation, unexpectedly died on January 20, 2021. She was admitted the night before for complications due to diabetes, but died the next morning. Her family found out after the funeral Denny had fallen in the middle of the night. An investigation was called under the Protection for Persons in Care Act. The final report concluded the facility failed to provide adequate care. Jenny Lee Francis, Denny's daughter, says,
It was very hard to read the report. It was very hard to read the report.
According to the report, the fall was consistently reported as unwitnessed. Therefore, investigators were unable to determine how the fall occurred and the length of time the affected patient was on the floor. The report continues that around 2 a.m., another patient was ringing their call bell while standing in the doorway attempting to get attention of the staff, saying someone is on the floor in here and someone needs help in here. This patient did not want to appear on camera, but told APTN News the report left out some details. Although unable to walk due to a minor stroke, this patient crawled across the floor to call for help, a detail Sark told the investigators.
But he said, Judy, is she all right? I said, I think so. She's holding on to my bed. And he said, nobody's coming. And he crawled, and he just got a stroke.
Sark says she felt the investigators were trying to lead her, saying she could not have possibly seen the aftermath of the fall because it was too dark. According to Sark, Denny complained to staff she hurt her head.
Finally, the guy came. He said, what you doing down there? He said, I've fallen, hit my head.
We put her allegations to the Nova Scotia Department of Seniors and Long-Term Care. They conducted the investigation and found inadequate care in Denny's case. In an email statement to APTN News, they said, under privacy conditions, the department cannot comment on specific individuals or complaints. Mary I. Jo Francis, Denny's daughter-in-law, is frustrated.
That's the point of everything, not only for the hospital to be held accountable, because somebody has to be held accountable for this, but the awareness that this is happening and it shouldn't be happening and that people need to speak up.
The family filed a complaint with the College of Physicians and Surgeons, which has determined a review will be conducted by an investigation committee of the college. The family has contacted the medical examiner to conduct a private investigation.
There's too many stories like ours. There's too many. And there's a lot of people that never got the help they needed or any sources or proof of anything. And since we got this far, we have to keep going.
Joe Francis hopes to find a lawyer to help with the process.
Nobody tells you how to deal with this sort of situation. With all of the complaints, with all of the investigation, all of the reports, nobody tells you or guides you that you can do this stuff.
In the meantime, the family is filing a complaint with the Nova Scotia College of Nursing. Angel Moore, APTN National News, Eskazoni, First Nation.
The National Centre for Truth and Reconciliation at the University of Manitoba is in line for $28.5 million in federal funding. The funding will be spread over 5 years. This is on top of $60 million earmarked in this year's budget for a new building. The NCTR made the announcement at a press conference today. Crown Indigenous Relations Minister Mark Miller and members of the Survivors Circle joined the Centre's Executive Director, Stephanie Scott. Scott said the funding will help create a permanent place for the world to learn the truth about Canada's residential schools.
The funding announced by the Government of Canada is crucial to fulfilling that vision. This includes funding toward the construction of a new permanent home for the NCTR, a place that survivors can call their own and where they can welcome researchers and students from across Canada. We see this new home as an international learning lodge. This will be a place where survivors, their families, and people from across Canada and around the world can come to hear and understand the truth about residential school institutions and about the wider history of colonialism.
Every one of Nunavut's 25 communities are run on diesel power, which is expensive and even more expensive when you have to send it all by ship. Northern Affairs Minister Dan Van Dal was in Iqaluit today to announce $4 million in funding toward a hydroelectric project in Iqaluit. The last time a project like this was pitched for the Nunavut capital was back in 2013 when it was shot down by the Regional Inuit Association. Harry Flaherty represents QC, the business arm of that Inuit Association, and a partner in the proposed hydro project. He explains why he thinks it will be different this time around.
It's the community consultation. We have to engage with the stakeholders, the hunters and trappers, the everyday person who lives around Iqaluit. They are the one who has to be consulted first.
All right, it's time for a short break, but still to come, a non-Indigenous man in Quebec has picked up and started speaking the declining Innu language. Welcome back to APTN National News. After years of not listening to complaints by Indigenous communities in Quebec, there's now a new minister in charge of the province's forests and wildlife. And good timing, because the Algonquin Nation is getting ready to sit down at the discussion table and revisit the moose hunting file, this time with a grassroots research report in hand. Here's Lindsay Richardson with more.
It's not something you see every day. Moose, alive and thriving, precisely what at least 2 Indigenous nations in Quebec are trying to protect. These collar videos were taken on the Cree territory of Iwichji, where a 2-year sport hunting pause is now underway. Meanwhile, the clock is running out for the Algonquin Nation, who've just tabled a report demanding an extension to a moose hunting moratorium in place on their ancestral land.
This is a state of crisis now. There's no way you can refute that.
Quebec signed off on the moratorium in the La Vérendrye Wildlife Reserve last year, so scientists and traditionalists could complete studies. The most recent aerial survey from 2019 showed a 35% decline in moose numbers in just 8 years. The Algonquin's grassroots report, tabled last week, is a macro look at the factors contributing to moose decline, with things like waste and poaching, habitat loss, and focus on revenue all directly impacting moose numbers.
It's a sensitive balance. And when capitalism comes in and rolls through there, that big extractive beast, it's like, what do we do?
For the Algonquin, moose represents food security, commerce and culture, and sport hunting, exploitation, and colonization.
I believe in 2019, 20,000 moose were harvested in Quebec because it was the bull, it was the calf, and it was the cow. But I'm a guy that's always in the bush, and to me that's 20,000 furs in the garbage. That's 20,000 nose, tongues just in the garbage. And that's impact for me.
Quebec's Indigenous Affairs Ministry says a gradual resumption of sports hunting will begin in 2023, but the plan is to conduct updated joint studies with the Algonquin Nation to ensure harmonious cohabitation. But grassroots leaders know negative feelings from hunters haven't disappeared.
We're still facing some racism, like the signs that were put up that there was a moratorium effect, and there's going to be like vandalism, like beep Indians and so on, we're still facing that. This is why the report was written in a way to be able to address all the issues that we're facing, and so that our people are not disrespected, but also the animals are not disrespected.
A copy of the report was forwarded to Quebec's new Minister of Wildlife, Benoit Charette. He has yet to comment on its findings. Lindsay Richardson, APTN National News, Montreal.
Use of the Innu language is in decline in the North Shore region of Quebec. But that hasn't stopped one non-Indigenous man from picking up the language, to the surprise and the delight of many in the Innu community he works in. Here's that story, the original by Shushan Bécan, voiced by Tom Fenario.
Hubert LaSalve isn't Indigenous, but everyone in the Innu community of Maniotanam knows who he is. After all, it's hard to miss the Quebecois outreach worker who can carry a conversation in the Innu language. LaSalve says his spoken Innu frequently shocks people, in a good way. LaSalve has a trick. He sticks labels on the walls to remember his Innu vocabulary, and they also serve as reminders. Thanks to his trusty label maker, the labels are everywhere in his house. Another thing that helps Lassard, he's gregarious. LaSalve has been a speaker for 2 years. It sometimes leads to odd situations where he's speaking Innu to Innu people, who in turn are speaking French to him.
Quick. And what's it then? Hein? What's that? Oui, c'est à moi ici. Ça va, ouais. Je suis américain, ça. Ça va? Ah oui, acheté un sondé, même. Non? Même, ah oui, un micro-puce, puis un tatouage là-dedans,
Originally from the Quebec City area, Lassard first arrived in the community 8 years ago to attend the renowned Innu Nikamu Music Festival, where he fell in love with Innu music. Wanting to understand the lyrics led to him learning the language known as Innu Amun. One step at a time is good advice, but in the case of LaSalve, one label at a time might be more appropriate. A story by Shushan Bécan, APTN National News, Maniotanam, Quebec.
Wow, what a great story that is. All right, it's time to step aside for one more break, but still to come, highlights from today's In Focus. Welcome back. It's time now for our photo of the day. Our very own Angel Moore snapped this picture of the Halifax Indigenous Veterans Day ceremony at the Mi'kmaq Native Friendship Center yesterday. First Nations, Inuit, and Métis veterans were honored across the country. It's a beautiful photo there, Angel. You can send your shots to share at aptn.ca to be featured as our next photo of the day. All right, now let's take a look at tomorrow's weather forecast. We start on the East Coast, 15 in Halifax and 11 in Charlottetown. -1 in Cartwright and +1 in Happy Valley Goose Bay. 12 degrees in Quebec City and 16 in Montreal. 17 degrees in Toronto and 16 in North Bay. -1 in Thunder Bay and -3 in Sioux Lookout. -13 in Nemica Cloud and Churchill and -9 in God's Lake. -5 in Barons River and some snow and -4 in Winnipeg. -14 in Regina and -19 in North Battleford. -9 in Buffalo Narrows and -13 in Stony Rapids. Making our way west, -10 in Fort Chipewyan and -16 in Peace River. -11 in Edmonton and -7 in Calgary. +5 in Campbell River and 0 degrees in Bella Coola. 8 degrees in Sandspit and -18 in Clear and Fort Nelson. -11 and some snow in Dawson and -11 in Old Crow. -7 in Norman Wells and clear and -16 in Fort Simpson. -8 in Fort McPherson and -9 in Colville Lake. -18 in Cambridge Bay and -21 in Chesterfield. -18 in Arctic Bay and -18 in Igloolik. Despite serving his country throughout the entirety of the Second World War, First Nations veteran Elijah Smith was not treated as an equal when he returned home. As Sarah Connors explains, Smith's experience in the war laid the foundation for him to become one of the territory's most celebrated First Nations leaders.
This hang for a lot of years in the Council for Yukon First Nations.
Steve Smith beams with pride when it comes to talking about his father, Elijah Smith. Elijah is best known for his groundbreaking work in leading land claim and self-government agreements for First Nations in Yukon. Among his many accomplishments, he also served 6 years in World War II.
He was really, really proud of having the uniform and serving the country and going off.
Elijah was born in 1912 in Champaign, Yukon. In 1939, he enfranchised himself so he could enlist in the war.
He saw it as an opportunity to see the world, and he saw it an opportunity to do his part. And I think most veterans did that.
Elijah was trained in heavy equipment operation and was part of the Dieppe raid in northern France. Smith says his father was reluctant to share what he witnessed.
I think this is typical of a Canadian soldier or somebody who fought in the Second World War.
However, he did talk about his positive experiences fighting alongside non-Indigenous soldiers.
Fighting, side by side with other individuals who are not of the same race, fashioned his outlook when he came home, right?
But when Elijah returned home, he was disenfranchised and dismayed to learn he didn't qualify for the same benefits as other soldiers, like receiving land for farming.
That was kind of like the first initial reasons why he was like, okay, well, this is interesting that I'm not really a citizen within my own homeland, right?
Elijah was later elected as chief of the Champagne and Ajax First Nations in the late 1960s and went on to lead several Yukon First Nations organizations. In 1973, he spearheaded a delegation of Yukon First Nations leaders to Ottawa to present Together Today for Our Children Tomorrow to Prime Minister Pierre Trudeau. The meeting marked the beginning of modern land claims negotiations in the territory.
His leadership style I believe, came directly from his experience in the war. He always says that. It gave me a trade. Right, and he came back and he ran a little trucking company.
A former chief himself, Smith says his father is an inspiration.
You try to make this world a better place, and I directly have a responsibility to his sacrifice to ensure that I live. I try to live up to his ideals.
Elijah remained a well-known leader in the Yukon until his death in 1991. Smith says it's important to remember soldiers like his father who put their life on the line.
I'm proud of the fact that he fought in the Second World War. He served his country, and he served all of us today.
Sarah Connors, APTN National News, Whitehorse.
On this week's episode of In Focus, we looked into Indigenous storytelling through podcasts. From motivational speaking to preserving languages, here's a look at what some of our guests had to say. Why is it important for Indigenous people to tell our stories? Why is that so important?
Because our stories empower other people. It's, if we can find ourselves in another person, if we can relate to another person, then it empowers us. And then we feel like we're not alone. Because so many of us feel like we're alone. And so then we feel like we're not alone and we're in this together.
So without having podcasts like these, especially ones that are working with the endangered languages like the Saulteaux, Dakota, Lakota, Nakota, it's very difficult to find resources, to help folks. And if you are, a 60s scoop survivor or someone that has been taken away from their culture, how do you find those ties back? How do you find the way back?
After 500 years of genocide, Indigenous peoples are still here, asserting, living, and defending our sovereignty all over Turtle Island.
It's literally capturing forever the voices of elders and activists and all of that in real time.
There's so many stories that I've learned in the couple of years that I'm doing this that I wouldn't even have ever found anywhere, which is true. And the importance of it is passing it on and sharing to people, but it's in the language. People love hearing the language.
All right, that's all we have for you tonight on APTN National News. If you missed any of our news tonight and want to catch up, you can visit our website, aptnnews.ca. I'm Daryl Stranger. For all of us here, we want to thank you for joining us. Miigwech, and have a great night.